The hot wind came from the south, carrying with it the faint scent of dust and concrete, swirling around the skeleton of the massive construction site. Tower cranes loomed like giants against the pale blue sky, their arms stretching wide in slow, measured arcs. Below, the workers bustled about, their faces flushed with exertion under hard hats, while machines hummed and clanked, turning steel and stone into the future. At the edge of the site, a makeshift helipad had been cleared and reinforced just hours earlier. There, a sleek black helicopter waited, gleaming in the harsh midday sun, ready to lift off and carry its most important passenger away. Richard Caldwell, the man at the center of it all, strode toward the helicopter with a purposeful pace. His dark gray suit rippled slightly in the gusts, impeccably tailored but not flashy, a symbol of power restrained, authority earned. Around his tinted sunglasses, his sharp eyes flickered over the construction site he had poured so much of his life into building. This was no ordinary project. It was the pinnacle of his career, the largest residential complex his company had ever launched, promising to transform the city skyline and redefine urban living. Cameras flashed from every angle, capturing his confident smile and commanding presence. A carefully staged moment of triumph. Engineers nodded in approval as he passed. Security personnel straightened their stances, and the press hovered expectantly. Richard lifted his hand in a casual wave, acknowledging the applause of a few supporters who had gathered. The weight of decades of ambition and sacrifice seemed to settle on his shoulders, but he carried it with practiced ease. Yet beneath the surface of the celebration, a tremor stirred in the air, subtle, almost imperceptible, like the first whisper of a coming storm. Suddenly, cutting through the drone of machinery and the distant chatter of workers, came a sharp, clear voice, high-pitched, urgent, and trembling with fear. "Don't get in the helicopter!" The shout sliced through the hum like a lightning strike. Heads snapped up, conversations halted, cameras swiveled wildly, capturing the unexpected interruption. The voice belonged to a little girl, no more than 8 years old, standing near an old, battered portable toilet at the edge of the site. She wore a faded, dusty jumpsuit far too big for her slight frame. Her dark skin was smudged with dirt, and her hair tangled from hours of running between steel beams and scaffolding. In her small hand, she clutched a worn-out plastic badge, a sign hanging from her mother's neck identifying her as part of the site's cleaning crew. Nearby, a woman hurried over, worry etched deep in her face. The mother, Tanya Brooks, glanced up at her daughter with panic. But the girl's eyes were locked on Richard Caldwell. They were wide, shining with something fierce and determined, despite the tremble in her voice. Her name was Amira. Richard froze. The world around him seemed to still. The machines, the chatter, the blinking cameras, all faded into silence, save for the single voice of this little girl. His assistant whispered nervously beside him, "She's just a kid, sir, probably scared, or playing up for attention." Another voice, from a security guard, added dismissively, "Don't waste time. The launch is on schedule." Richard removed his sunglasses, lowering them to reveal a flicker of doubt in his eyes. The helicopter's rotors were already starting to turn, slow at first, then gaining speed with a low rumble that vibrated the concrete beneath his feet. The little girl's voice rose again, more urgent this time, trembling on the edge of tears. "Please, don't get in. There's something wrong. They're trying to make it take off." The crowd tensed. A few workers glanced at one another, their faces pale. The press caught every moment, but Richard felt a strange, cold weight settle in his gut. His hand hesitated near the helicopter door. The pilot was ready. The engines roared louder. Then his phone rang, sharp, insistent. Richard glanced at the caller ID. It was his son. His fingers trembled as he answered, voice tight. Yes? Dad, wait. The safety tests aren't complete. The engineers just called. There's an issue with the fuel valve. Don't take off yet. Richard's heart pounded. His mind raced. Stop the launch, he ordered, barely above a whisper. A flurry of activity erupted around the helipad. The pilot's hands tightened on the controls. The rotors slowed. And then, just as the blades began to lose momentum, a tremendous explosion shattered the air. The world erupted in a searing blast of fire and smoke. The helipad was engulfed in an orange inferno that rose like a monstrous beast into the sky. Pieces of metal and shards of glass flew in every direction. The ground shook beneath the feet of the stunned onlookers. A deafening roar filled the air, drowning out all screams and alarms. Richard was hurled backward by the blast's force, crashing onto the rough concrete with a bone-jarring impact. His ears rang, his vision blurred. Flames licked at the edges of his consciousness. And yet, somehow, miraculously, he survived. Smoke curled around him, thick and choking. Shouts and cries echoed through the haze. He felt a small hand grasp his shoulder, trembling with fear and desperation. Opening his eyes, he saw her. Amira. Her face streaked with dirt and tears, eyes blazing with an urgency that defied her years. "You're alive," she whispered, voice barely audible over the chaos. "You have to be. You have to listen." Richard blinked, still dazed. How? Why? This tiny girl, a child no one had noticed before, had screamed a warning loud enough to save his life, and now, lying broken but breathing on the concrete, he realized something far deeper. This voice, this small beacon of courage and truth, was exactly what he had been missing all along. The story of that day would ripple through the city and beyond. The day an 8-year-old girl's voice cut through power and pride, warning of danger where no one else dared to listen. But for Richard Caldwell, the greatest shock was yet to come, because the voice through the wind was not just a cry for help, it was a challenge, a question. How many voices had he ignored before? How many warnings had slipped by unheard? And more importantly, would he dare to hear them now? The morning after the explosion, the sprawling construction site lay eerily silent, cordoned off by yellow police tape fluttering weakly in the breeze. The usual symphony of hammers and engines was replaced by murmurs, flashing cameras, and the distant wail of sirens. News vans lined the street outside the headquarters of Caldwell Developments, reporters clamoring for any scrap of information about the disaster that had rocked the city. Inside the towering glass building on the 67th floor, Richard Caldwell sat alone in his corner office, staring at the flickering screen of his laptop. Security footage played on loop. The moment Amira Brooks burst through the crowd, her small voice cutting through the roar of machines and engines, shouting a warning no one expected. The same clip was playing on every news channel, on every social feed. The face of the little hero, as the headlines called her, filled the screens with a mixture of awe and disbelief. But Richard wasn't looking at the headlines. He was studying the girl herself. Not the image polished by media, but the reality beneath it. How could a child, a member of the cleaning staff's family, know something so vital? How had her desperate cry saved his life and those of others? He called his executive assistant. "Find her. Bring her here. I want to meet the girl who stopped the launch." Across town, in a modest apartment crammed with hand-me-down furniture and the hum of a small electric heater, Tanya Brooks sat at a battered kitchen table, staring out the window with tired eyes. She wiped a tear from her cheek and reached across the table, taking her daughter Amira's hand gently in hers. "Sweetheart, you don't have to talk to anyone," Tanya said softly, voice trembling. "You did what you had to do. But now it's better if you stay quiet." Amira's eyes were wide and restless. The spotlight had found her too fast, too fierce. Reporters had knocked on their door, neighbors whispered, and strangers recognized her face everywhere. But Amira didn't feel like a hero. She felt alone. "I wasn't just shouting," Amira finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I heard them. I heard what they said." Tanya's hand tightened around her daughter's. "You don't have to say anything more, Amira." But the girl shook her head. "I have to tell you. I have to tell someone." 2 days earlier, Tanya had sent Amira to fetch a mop from the supply room, a small, cramped space tucked behind the machinery shed, usually off-limits to anyone but the janitors and technicians. The door was cracked open, and Amira peeked inside. Voices drifted out, low and urgent. Inside, 2 men stood facing each other. One was tall, wearing a suit that seemed too expensive for a construction site. The other wore a dark jacket, holding a phone pressed tightly to his ear. Amira couldn't hear every word clearly, but one thing was unmistakable. The tone was sharp, tense, and full of danger. "If he takes off before the valve is shut, the whole thing will blow. Just follow orders. Don't ask questions. Timing is everything." Amira froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't understand every detail. Something about fuel, valves, timing, but she knew it was bad. Very bad. She crept away, her small feet silent on the gravel. When she reached her mother, she tried to explain. "Mom, they're planning something. Something bad. They're going to make the helicopter take off even though it's not safe." Tanya's face went pale. She pulled Amira close, voice shaking. "No, honey, you must forget what you heard. You don't know what you're talking about." "But I do," Amira insisted. "I heard them. I have to say something." Tanya's eyes filled with tears. "Please, Amira, for our family's sake, for your safety, you must stay quiet." Back in the apartment, Amira's mother sighed deeply. She knew the truth was more complicated than her daughter realized. There were forces at play. Powerful people, hidden agendas, corporate secrets, and speaking out could bring danger. But Amira had never been silent before. When the morning sun poured through the threadbare curtains, she made a decision. If the adults wouldn't listen, she would raise her voice herself. In the gleaming glass tower of Caldwell Developments, Richard watched the video of Amira's warning for the 100th time. The other executives urged caution, suggesting the girl was simply lucky, maybe mistaken, maybe even coached. But Richard's gut told him otherwise. "Bring her to my office," he ordered again, this time to his head of security. When Amira arrived at the company's headquarters, flanked by her mother and a wary security guard, she felt out of place. A tiny figure swallowed by the gleaming marble lobby and the polished suits towering above her. The elevator ride to the top floor was silent, except for the soft hum of machinery and the occasional beep of the control panel. Finally, the doors opened to reveal Richard Caldwell himself. He stood up from behind his massive desk and motioned for the girl to come forward. "Amira," he said gently, "I want to thank you for what you did. Your voice saved lives." Amira swallowed hard, but held his gaze. She wasn't sure if he really believed her, or if she was just another story. Richard leaned forward, voice quieter but intense. Tell me exactly what you heard." The little girl took a breath, then told him everything. The men, the phone call, the plan to make the helicopter take off despite the dangers. Richard listened, every word sinking in like a heavy stone. Around them, the glass walls reflected the bustling city below, but for a moment, nothing else mattered. Finally, Richard nodded. "You have courage, Amira. More than many adults I know." He paused, then continued. "Now we need to find out who was behind this. Who tried to kill us?" Back at the construction site, the investigation had begun in earnest. Security teams combed through every corner. The company's internal auditors scanned communications. The local police had opened a formal inquiry. But amid the buzz of high-stakes scrutiny, Amira and her mother returned to their quiet lives. The mother relieved but frightened. The daughter burdened yet resolute. Amira had spoken up when no one else would. She had heard a voice others ignored. And now, Richard Caldwell faced a choice: to open his ears to those whispers carried by the wind, or to silence them forever. Because sometimes, the smallest voices carry the loudest truths. The day of the announcement was unlike any other in the glittering tower of Caldwell Developments. The vast conference hall, usually reserved for high-level meetings and corporate celebrations, had been transformed into a stage for something far more profound. A moment of reckoning, a testament to courage, and a chance to rewrite a story long overdue. Reporters packed the room, cameras poised, microphones ready to capture every word. Executives in tailored suits whispered among themselves, their faces a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. The air buzzed with anticipation. At the center of the stage stood Richard Caldwell, the billionaire who had just survived an explosion that could have ended his life. Beside him, for the first time before such a crowd, stood two figures who would soon change everything. Tanya Brooks, the humble cleaning lady, and her daughter Amira, the 8-year-old girl whose voice had pierced the thunder of machines and danger. To save him, Richard stepped forward, clearing his throat as silence fell. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Today is not just about the launch of a new project. It is about the power of truth, about listening when the world chooses to turn a deaf ear." He looked at Amira, who stood clutching her mother's hand, her eyes bright but shy beneath the spotlight. "This little girl," Richard continued, "had the courage to speak when no one else would. She risked everything to warn us, and because of her, lives were saved. Mine included." The crowd erupted into applause, some standing, others wiping tears. But Richard's gaze was fixed on Amira, and in that moment, the noise of the world fell away. "You see," he said, "we often think that power and experience give us the right answers, but sometimes the greatest wisdom comes from the most unexpected places." He turned to Tanya. "And to you, Tanya, thank you. For raising a daughter who speaks truth to power, even when it's hard, even when it means standing alone." Tanya smiled softly, tears glistening in her eyes, pride radiating from every line on her face. Richard raised his hand, silencing the applause, and announced, "From this day forward, the Brooks family will receive lifelong financial support. Amira will be given every opportunity to pursue her education, any school, any university, anywhere in the world. And to honor her bravery, we are establishing the Amira Brooks Foundation, a foundation dedicated to empowering young girls who dare to speak up, who challenge the silence, and who choose courage over comfort." As reporters snapped pictures and shouted questions, Amira stood quietly, her heart pounding. She had never wanted fame or attention. She had only wanted to be heard, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. But now, something deeper settled in her chest. Hope. Later, after the cameras and crowds had dispersed, a group of construction workers gathered near the site fence, watching the building's reflection shimmer in the setting sun. Most had been skeptical of the little girl just days before. To them, she had been invisible, a quiet child in a dusty jumpsuit, the daughter of the cleaning lady no one noticed. But today was different. Jamal, a seasoned foreman with a rough voice but kind eyes, was the first to break the silence. "She saved more than just Mr. Caldwell," he said, glancing around at his crew. "She saved all of us." Heads nodded in agreement. Maria, a young engineer who had been near the helipad the day of the explosion, spoke up. "I almost got on that helicopter," she said, voice trembling. "If it hadn't been for her, I wouldn't be standing here." The workers began to clap softly, then louder, their cheers echoing against the steel beams and concrete walls. For the first time, they saw Amira not as the cleaning lady's kid, but as a beacon, a symbol of bravery and truth. Back inside the corporate office, as the last of the guests left, a quiet moment unfolded between Richard and Amira. "Do you know why I want you to be part of this, Amira?" he asked, kneeling to her level. She shook her head. "Because your voice mattered when no one else's did, and that kind of courage, it changes the world." Amira's lips curved into a small, genuine smile. At that moment, Richard realized that this wasn't just a story about survival or business success. It was about listening to the whispers beneath the noise, about recognizing the strength in the smallest voices. And more than anything, it was about learning to never ignore the truth, no matter where it came from. In the weeks and months that followed, the Amira Brooks Foundation became a beacon of hope for young girls across the city. Scholarships were awarded, mentorship programs launched, and stories of unheard voices finally amplified. Amira herself became a quiet symbol of what it meant to stand up, a reminder that sometimes the bravest act is simply to speak. And Richard Caldwell? He became a different man, one who learned that true leadership isn't about power or prestige, but about humility and listening. Because in the end, it was a little girl's voice through the wind that saved them all.